Hello there, short friends. So, some of you may know that the Hanwei bamboo mat is my favoritist katana. You might even notice on the CAS Iberia website my name is here outlining what a boner I have for the sword. But that's not what I want to talk to you about today, because today I have my Hanwei bamboo mat, but I also got in a recent sword acquisition the Sahir Hanwei bamboo mat. And I thought to myself, one interesting thing that I could share with the community would be what is the difference if you put a custom mount on a sword, something I've been an advocate of, on a modern production sword. This is a Hanwei bamboo mat underneath all of its bedazzled Mitsudome exterior. And so I thought, well, hey, they should be similar enough for me to compare and show you what kind of dynamic properties are different when you put on a different hilt assembly or, different ska and different all this, that, and the other. How does that change the dynamic properties? And unfortunately, that theory got pretty much fucked. Now, the reason I say that is because when I take these down to bare blades, there is a 4-ounce difference in the weight between them. Just as a bare blade, if I remove all the saya and the handle and the tsuba and all the everything, all the habaki, everything, between the two blades there is a 4-ounce difference. And what I found is not only is that 4 ounces, basically I can't really equate for it. This blade is about a 1/4 inch longer and in the actual blade length, and the Nakago is also about a 1/4 inch longer, making about a 1/2 inch of steel in terms of difference. But how that's distributed over the blade is, I guess, another interesting question. Anyway, it brought up another question, and that is that I have such a boner for this sword, and over time, as some of you may also know, I've owned several Hanwei bamboo mats. I don't exactly know, less than 10, but not much less. And I have found that none of them have felt close enough to this blade to keep. All of them I bought with the idea that I wanted a spare Hanwei bamboo mat katana so that when I inevitably break my beloved with a dumb cut or one of the other dumb activities I do, I would have another one immediately at the ready, another round in the chamber, so to speak. But all of the bamboo mats that I bought have felt different than this one, so much so that they pretty much all got sold or traded or something like that. Now, the other thing to note is that I was not as astute a student, or at least as active in documenting things as I've progressed. So, what's the best word to say? I didn't write shit down. That's the best way to say it. Plain and simply, I did not measure or account for what those differences are. Now, there's other tools available today, like Knowledge in my head and the Weapon Dynamics computer and some other stuff that is able to quantify what the differences are in a more tangible way, at least more than I can articulate. And so I thought, well, I guess that's interesting. Now, there's some variation. It's common when you buy a production sword to expect it to have some mild variation. But 4 ounces of difference between bare blades is a pretty substantial difference. I was talking with Tom Kinder in a recent review thing, and part of the conversation, maybe they got edited out, was that he described that removing basically the width of a human hair across the entire blade could potentially make a tangible difference, or has made a tangible difference to some folks that are maybe a little bit more astute with how swords feel. But basically, very small amounts of weight removed from a sword can make a tangible difference. So 4 ounces of difference in a bare blade is pretty substantial. Now, the reason I'm continuing this conversation, is that these two swords weigh basically about 1/2 ounce difference. This blade, my Hanwei bamboo mat, weighs 2 pounds, 9.5 ounces if I take it out of the saya, but with the hilt assembly on. And this Hanwei bamboo mat weighs 2 pounds, 9 ounces. They're a 1/2 ounce difference. The trick is that the bare blade on this Hanwei bamboo mat is 2 pounds, 1/2 ounce, and this one is 1 pound, 13 ounces. Again, that bare blade is about a 4 ounce difference. And so the hilt assembly on this is much heavier, and the hilt assembly on this is much lighter. I'm saying hilt, but the Tsuka, the Fujikashira, the Tsuba, you can even see some of the differences. Now, they are supposed to be the same manufacturer blade, though admittedly this Hanwei bamboo mat is likely a much earlier version. You're likely able to see some simple cosmetic differences in the polish. Now, my Hanwei bamboo mat has been used relatively extensively, and I've wiped it off with Mother's Mag and some other abrasive materials, though it hasn't really been sharpened. This Hanwei bamboo mat is in its original polish, and you can see that it's really quite bold compared to this one, though when I got it, the polish really hasn't changed all that much, though maybe it's been very gradual. Anyway, they are very, very similar blades, though you can probably make out, maybe, if you're very, very astute with the eye, that they are similar but different. This one is wider and thicker than this one is here, and the Sori is different. It's shallower in this one than it is here. This is a full 1-inch Sori. This is marginally less. The Kasaki and all that are, I don't know, it's more or less the polish. I suppose this one is even probably sharper, but nevertheless, the distal taper, the thickness, all that is a bit bigger with this than, and that probably accounts for the 4-ounce difference that I'm seeing, at least in terms of the bare blade weight. The other things that you're going to notice on here are mostly aesthetic differences, but also some things that are more difficult to articulate, and I'll get into this later on, but the mount is different. You can see that this is a much thicker handle than this does. The tsuba is different, though that doesn't really make too much difference. And the ito, the difference in wrapping material on this is much different. This is Fred Lohman's Tsunami material, which is similar to suede. It's grippy, not sticky, but it has a gripping sensation that makes it feel a little bit more secure in the hand than the other. So I also should note that I have some internal biases that need to be noted, and that is, I love this sword, this one in particular, and I'm very, very biased toward it. It means I really like it, and I'm going to do my best to be objective, but it's really easy for me to say this one feels the best because it does to me, and this one doesn't feel as good because reasons. But I'll do my best to be objective, and I'm going to include the weapon dynamics computer as well to really probably help articulate the conversation in a more tangible way. So the main thing I guess I'm trying to note here, though, is that these blades have similar shapes. They are within a 1/4 inch of each other in terms of blade length. They're made by the same manufacturer out of supposedly the same type of steel, and they weigh within a 1/2 ounce of one another, but they have reasonably different dynamic properties. It's difficult for me to say exactly how, but in a nutshell, this one feels more connected to my hand, but tip heavier. It feels harder to move, harder to stop, harder to get going, but I do feel like my tip control is better. This one feels lighter, more agile. I would venture a guess that most people would choose this sword over this one. It's lighter, the balance seems to be more lively. I wouldn't describe it as exactly as lively, but a good cross between something that feels like it has enough mass to really move through targets well, while simultaneously being light enough that it wouldn't be really uncomfortable to do kata or something like that with. Not the greatest at necessarily any one of those activities, whether it be cutting or kata or whatever you want to do, but it feels like a reasonably well balanced sword in my hand, but more towards the tip heavy side of things. It feels like 60% cutter, 40% mover, if I had to put it on a diagram, I guess. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that and pull up the actual weapon dynamics computer. So this is the weapon dynamics computer, and what you can see is the Hanwei Bamboo Mat New and the Bamboo Mat Custom, representing the differences between the two. Now, a couple things to note as I compare the two. One, I noted that there's a 1/2 ounce difference. Hopefully that's translated here as I convert pounds and ounces to grams. Sometimes something gets lost in translation, but I think that's right. Hilt extremity is 0. I'm hoping that I'm using this right, and I will include links to these in the description down below if you have any interest in tinkering with the measurements yourself. Grip reference, you'll notice there are some slight differences in the grip. Even though the new one had only a marginally shorter Nakago, this one actually has a shorter handle, and the reason is that I was able to have them customize it, or the person I used to customize made a custom handle and made it perhaps a little shorter or more to my liking at about 11 inches. The blade extremity, you can see that the overall length is again marginally different. Now this doesn't measure the blade, so I say 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch difference in terms of the blade, but I'm measuring from the Munmachi to the tip, the very top of the Kasaki, and that's where I get that 1/4 inch. But this is measuring kind of the total length of the blade itself, including, basically it's all the way from one end to the other. And so because the Nakago and hilt, or rather the ska on there is made in a shorter way, it really brings them within a centimeter of one another, which is pretty close, even though one does have a longer cutting edge. The center of gravity is a little bit different. You can see that the center of gravity is a little bit closer to the hilt on the custom piece, or a little closer to the ska, a little closer to the tsuba, little closer to the hand, basically. And this one's a little further out. And generally speaking, that means that if the center of gravity or the point of balance realistically is closer to the hand, that generally means that it feels more lively. As that center of gravity or point of balance moves closer to your hand, that means that it's going to be more lively feeling. But here we see this custom piece, as I said, feels a little bit more cumbersome in the hand, but the point of balance on this one is a couple centimeters further out. The hilt node is also an interesting point. These two are the exact same measurement, and I really had to fiddle with this to make sure that I was getting it right, because I didn't quite believe it. But I whacked both swords quite a bit and felt them up pretty good, and they do have the same hilt node, at least as I'm able to measure. The blade node is also very, very similar, and I thought that was another interesting point. Given the difference in mass and the difference in hilt assembly, I thought that the blade node would be different. But again, within a centimeter, and made me think I was doing something wrong, but I measured it a lot, and I don't think I am. Anyway, moving on to the next part, we can compare just the action points that I use. Now, there's been some suggestions that I've gotten to use different action points, or rather, instead of doing the waggle test, doing a time method, and I don't yet, because I don't know, I'm lazy. This is the one I'm more comfortable using, even though I feel I've gotten sufficient evidence to suggest that it is less accurate than it could be. This is what I'm able to get. Now, I really fiddled with this because these theoretical values I see as probably the ballpark I should be in, given that if I'm sure of things up here, these theoretical values are a good guideline to say, hey, it probably should be there. Double check yourself if they're off. And I really made a lot of effort to ensure that I was getting them right, and I futzed around with it quite a bit. And I'm relatively confident in my measurements. Nevertheless, it was further off of the theoretical values than here, where those theoretical values seem to line up a little bit closer. The meat of the conversation for this is likely, though, down here. The tip rotational inertia, you can see this is a much higher number. Now, again, if you look on specs on websites and things, you'll see that the point of balance is often a metric that we use to say, well, if it's closer to the hilt, it's probably going to feel more lively. Yet these numbers would dictate that despite the swords having relatively similar weights and lengths, that this one, despite its closer point of balance, is going to feel more cumbersome to move around, which I feel is a little substantiated or maybe a more articulate. I don't know if it's articulate, it's numbers. The point is that this more accurately describes in mathematical terms or scientific terms why it feels more cumbersome to move around, in a sense. The thing to note about that is that the guide for the sword or the weapon dynamics computer, if I go up to this walkthrough guide here, it will say in really no uncertain terms that the where the hell is it? Rotational tip. The higher the number, the more difficult it is to move the tip. So I think that's relatively clear that this number being higher, roughly 20% higher, is indicative of it being probably a little bit more tip heavy. Maybe I'm reading into it wrong, or maybe I don't understand the test well enough. But some of these numbers look very, very close to one another, yet this tip rotational inertia, the being higher, gives me the idea that should substantiate that it's going to feel kind of more cumbersome to move around. Now, I've harped on that enough. The thing that I noted earlier was that the handle construction plays a bit of a part, and this is where I don't think the weapon dynamics computer really tells the whole story. And the reason for that is, again, admittedly, I have biases here, but if I compare this one, this silk Ito here, what I'm able to do is, as I move it around, I can see how it fits into my hand, how I grip it. I can get my fingers around it, but to get my palms, on the right side of things here, I don't know, the silk moves around just a little bit. It's a slippery material, it's new, it'll probably get filled up with sweat and become much harder over time. It's also a little bit loose in terms of how this Ito moves around. I mean, it's not catastrophically loose, it's pretty on par for Hanwei, but you can see that it moves around under pressure as I poke at it with my fingers. Everything is tight, everything is good, but the silk is a different material than the other sword. Now, as I take my Hanwei bamboo mat, again, these swords weigh within a half an ounce of one another with their hilts or their skas or their fully mounted handles on there. But this sword feels so much more connected to my hand. Now, I'm pretty content to say that might just be because I've moved this son of a bitch around a lot, and it naturally feels very comfortable to me. But this handle construction is also a good part of it. Now, as it's smaller, I'm able to get a grip on it, and it seems to fall into the portion of my hand that it's supposed to just by nature. Also, this grippy handle substance really just plants it in my hand, so as I move it around and shake it and swing it like a baseball bat, I just feel very connected to the sword and the tip, and it doesn't wiggle and squirm around in my hand, which is likely why to me it gives a sense of control that I don't get with the other one, despite the other bamboo mat maybe having better dynamics, at least what most people would consider better dynamics. That's stuff that I don't think you can quite quantify when you're talking about the weapon dynamics computer, is the feeling you get based on different materials. Now, these swords, again, they weigh very similar amounts, and I like that the dynamics computer shows the mass distribution. So as you're just, if all things are equal and you're holding them lightly and all these other factors don't play into account, this kind of wants to lean forward more. It's a little harder to get moving and get started. It's a little harder to stop moving, frankly. But that's augmented by these additional details, this really tight ito that doesn't move around. So as I cast my tip out, I don't, my fingers grip on here and nothing is moving around in the hilt assembly. Everything is super tight, and that changes, I think, the dynamics a bit in a way that unfortunately doesn't show up on the weapon dynamics computer. And I'd be interested to know if other folks have had similar experiences or things that don't necessarily, don't show up on the weapon dynamics computer and are a lot more difficult to show. In any respect, what I initially intended to show you was a video that said, hey, here's how the dynamics of a different hilt or a different ska or a different mount can affect the performance or dynamics of your blade. And while I couldn't do that really successfully, given that there was a 4-ounce difference in the bare blade, and it wouldn't be fair to compare the dynamics of something with such a variance in terms of its weight, I think it was interesting to show you two swords that effectively weigh the same thing, made by the same manufacturer, that use the same type of steel, but where the dynamics, the hilt assembly, this one has a much lighter hilt. These components, this wooden handle, this wrap, this tsuba, all of this assembly versus just the bare blade and the Nakago underneath here, weigh a bit less than the new factory version, which makes this basically a heavier sword brought down to the same weight as a lighter sword, and how that might affect it. Now, naturally, if the point of balance is somewhere over here and I remove material from this location, it's going to bring it to a more tip-heavy feeling because more mass is out here and it's not countered by the mass over here. Anyway, it's an interesting thing, which makes me a little curious how the point of balance moved further down. It makes me wonder if I had the original furniture, which regrettably I don't, and the furniture on this Hanwei bamboo mat that I have doesn't fit on this. The Nakagos are different enough where I'd probably have to hammer it on and risk damaging this piece to get it to fit onto this, and it still probably wouldn't work really well. It makes me wish I hadn't sold and traded off the furniture that was originally on my Hanwei bamboo mat so I could compare what the differences are. I think that'd be an interesting, at least an interesting comparison to say, hey, if you want to change the dynamics of a blade you like and enhance it or alter it, you have some options. Unfortunately, I don't have the means to do that. Nevertheless, I hope that this was an interesting video and that you garnered something from it. I think it's been quite a bit more rambly, and I don't know that I actually have a point, or at least the point I started making the video with became void. So, blah. I'm done. I'm done talking. Hopefully it was interesting or helpful. As always, cheers and thanks for watching.